Well, welcome everyone. I see Cheryl is here and so many people. So I think we can get started and kind of let Amelia then take the floor. But I can start with a little bit of introduction. So officially, welcome everyone to the annual Kalamazoo Foodways Symposium. Today, this is our third live session this week. Before we get started, I'd like to just briefly introduce myself and Lizzie. We will be your facilitators for this session and for the rest of the week. My name is Christina Petrovska, and I work at Kalamazoo Valley Community College as a Food Systems Program Coordinator. And Lizzie, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Lizzie, and I am the Program Coordinator for Community, Culinary, and Nutrition. Thanks, Christina.
Thank you, Lizzie. So this year's Foodway Symposium theme is Plant Forward, and it focuses on celebrating plants in our lives and in our diets. We hope that you enjoyed the sessions that we're offering this year. The Kalamazoo Foodway Symposium inspires and empowers greater Kalamazoo communities to honor our agricultural history, heritage cuisines, celebrate good food, and work together to build a just and healthy future for all. This event is a collaboration between the Kalamazoo Valley Museum and the Brunson Healthy Living Campus. The program and activities provide historical, cultural, and practical insights into food and food systems in Southwest Michigan. It serves as a convening point for students, practitioners, and the community to come together to build a strong, vibrant local food system. Today, I'm really excited that Amelia will be talking about composting, and I love how that fits in with the whole concept about plants and how we celebrate them in our diets, but then also how they can really be returned back to the soil to keep providing for us. Amelia is a registered dietitian nutritionist who has spent time working both in food service and in healthcare, where she has seen how much food we throw away and how much it is needed. She currently works in telehealth, teaching group nutrition classes aimed at preventing and better managing chronic disease. And she's an avid gardener and composting enthusiast. Welcome, Amelia.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Lizzie. So happy to be here and with you all tonight. So yeah, thanks.
Woohoo!
Thank you. So we can start sharing the slides, if that's okay with you, Amelia.
You bet. I'm going to spotlight our presenter and go ahead and start sharing slides. So here we go, friends.
All right. Okay, so composting, talking about composting and completing food's life cycle. So what we'll talk about in this presentation for a little overview is why composting is so important. Talk a little bit about food waste, the different history, the history and causes of it. And then we'll cover some core concepts in composting, how to get started with it, and then touch a little bit on returning nutrients to the soil and why that's so important, and close with a call to action, because I think it's always nice to have some action steps to move forward on. So yeah. And yeah, for a little bit about myself as a dietitian, like Christina was saying, kind of why I'm talking about the compost is in that food waste, or in the background with the food service is I would see so much food getting wasted, thrown away, in the working in like dining halls or the restaurants, and then later on when you see that it's so needed for different people and that people don't have enough access to it. So that is why why the focus on composting today. So can go ahead to the next slide. So different reasons why composting is so important. So when we're throwing away food, first of all, there's some other resources that we're wasting. We're also throwing away water, wasting nutrients and minerals, the time that it takes to grow that food, and then also the energy that we get from the sun and from labor, sowing the seeds or plowing the fields, things like that. And then most often there's also fuel involved, food traveling from different places, as well as the wear and tear on machinery. So there's actually a lot of different costs that are associated with that food waste. So reducing food waste is actually ranked as the #3 most impactful step that can help reduce climate change by Project Drawdown, which looks at different solutions to climate change. Then another important reason for why we compost is for soil health. So when we think about the things that we add to a compost pile, it's things like leaves and paper, food scraps, plants, woods, twigs, flowers, all things that grow from the ground. So if we continue to cultivate these different plants and products and take from the ground and soil without giving anything back, then we're going to be degrading our soil health. Soil health is estimated to be degrading 10 times faster than it can be replenished. So if we're returning these food scraps to the ground, it's completing the life cycle of our plants. And then garbage, or reducing our landfill, or taking up less landfill space. So our garbage is collected every week. So it's easy for us to forget that these things that we're throwing away still actually go somewhere. So we're going to talk a little bit more about how things came to be this way in just a moment. And then number 4, reducing methane emissions. Food in the landfill actually doesn't biodegrade. It becomes a toxic sludge, which produces methane. And the impact of methane in the atmosphere is actually 25 times greater than that of carbon dioxide, which is the one we talk about all the time when we talk about climate change. So landfills actually contribute 16% of all US methane emissions. So if we can clean up our landfills and put these resources where they belong, we're also going to be creating a cleaner world. And then the last reason here for composting, or why it's so important, and there's plenty of reasons beyond the ones I have here, but you also get a deeper connection to the foods that we eat and what we throw away. So when you're composting your food, you're starting to look at, you see it more than just once when you throw it in the trash. You see it again when you put it on the pile. And you start thinking about like, oh, I noticed I had a cucumber in there that was perfectly, could have been perfectly good. Maybe next time I'm going to try to eat that a little sooner. Or it also kind of helps you reflect on what you're eating as well. Like, if you're composting just mostly coffee and eggshells, it's like, well, maybe I need to get a little more apples in my diet or something. So it's kind of an interesting reflection of that. And it just helps you build a deeper connection of the food to the foods that you're eating. So we have a really awesome video that summarizes this nicely that we're going to share now. Just a little 6-minute video, but it really covers a lot of nice topics related to composting and why it's so important.
Have you ever looked at a banana peel and wondered, is that it?
All that time spent nurturing the banana and now it's just waste?
Could this humble peel serve a greater purpose?
Currently in the US, over 60 billion pounds of mineral-rich food material go to landfills each year.
Imagine if we diverted those billions of pounds from the landfill and turned them into compost.
Imagine our cities, vacant lots converted into food forests. Imagine abundance everywhere.
And it can help reverse climate change.
But most likely, it won't. Why? Because we're insane.
We define waste as anything unused, unproductive, or not properly utilized.
But waste is a human invention. We're the only creatures on Earth who don't live a zero waste existence.
Yep, thanks to trillions of microbes that are in and around everything, including us.
Anything that lives gets repurposed and contributes to the growth of new life.
Some 500 million years ago, these microbes brought plants onto the land.
The microbes provided minerals and water in exchange for carbon sugars produced by the plants through photosynthesis.
This resulted in a terrestrial explosion of life.
More life meant more excretions and deaths, which meant more food and nutrients for decomposers, and all soil life, known as the soil food web.
This increased the abundance and biodiversity of ecosystems and turned barren land into fertile soil.
Today, composting mimics this natural upcycling process, transforming combinations of organic material into life-filled, nutrient-available organic matter.
Compost isn't just mulch, manure, or food waste on its own, nor does it stink. Compost has the aroma of the forest floor after a rain.
It also has superpowers. Compost can enhance food nutrition, increase crop yield, and strengthen plants' immune systems, all while increasing the soil's water-holding capacity. And compost stimulates plant growth by bringing in microbial life, nutrients, and water-retaining humus to depleted soils.
More plant growth takes even more carbon out of the atmosphere. Microbes feed plants. Plants feed microbes, and the self-regenerating soil carbon pump cycles on, building soil.
Compost is a regenerative substance. It isn't just fertilizer. It's an essential microbial source, a probiotic for the land beneath our feet.
Now, while we've made some great progress recycling paper and even composting yard trimmings, currently in the US, over 50% of trash going to landfills is food scraps, paper, yard trimmings, and wood, all compostable materials. We are throwing away the very building blocks of life. Only 5% of our food scraps get composted. 5%. That means over 60 billion pounds of mineral-rich food material, much still fully edible. The weight of 4.5 great Egyptian pyramids go to landfills each year. And there it rots, creating methane gas, a greenhouse gas up to 86 times more potent than CO2. And it's not just food. Grass, leaves, and clippings, all designed by nature to fall back to the ground and increase fertility, are shipped miles to landfill. Now that's insane. Some city governments are finally stepping up by providing green bins to make composting more available, but too often they're misused. Toxic material, trash, is being mixed with the stuff we grow our food in. Just stop it! Don't put toxins or non-organics in that bin, please! Our current agricultural system robs our soils of carbon and biology, replacing them with chemicals, leading to more degeneration and desertification. We've broken the regenerative loop of life. It's crazy.
Without soil, life on land as we know it is impossible. And soil without life, it's just dust.
If the soil is being stripped of its life-giving qualities, what can help save our future? Properly made compost. The soil would be spongy again, retaining water and restoring our underground water supplies.
Fertile farms producing tastier and more nutritious food and no longer covered in toxic chemicals.
Imagine a farm to table to compost to farm system.
This is the regenerative system our future depends on. And doing it at home is easier than you think. You can't at home? Use your green bin. If you for some reason don't have a green bin, request one from your city. Or find a neighbor or community garden who can use your compostables.
Cities like San Francisco, Los Angeles, St. Louis, and my hometown, New York, are leading the charge. Thank you.
Countries from Haiti to Australia are using compost to address food security and desertification.
Schools, hospitals, and restaurants are waking up to composting their food scraps.
Scientists and compost manufacturers are improving methods, making our superhero even more powerful.
Yes! Life isn't over for the humble peel. Along with other organic material, it can help restore fertility to our soil, regenerate our food systems, clean our water.
And it can help reverse climate change. Really.
Okay, so what can you do?
Do all you can to support composting.
If we're to keep the planet habitable, human beings must participate in regeneration.
Each of us can play a role to help regenerate our planet simply by composting.
The cycle of this can make or break us. You choose.
Great, thank you. So I have seen that video a few times now, and I'll just say that I used to love Rosario Dawson and one of my favorite movies as a teenager, and this little clip has topped it. But yeah, so with all these great reasons to compost, it just brings up the question, why isn't this more of a norm in our society? And how did we get to where we are, where this is just, the default place to put our food scraps? So I have this little timeline here on a brief history of food and waste in America. And it starts looking back during the Industrial Revolution when we had more of a circular economy era. So we've got a picture for this one. Can click for that. There's the 1920s. We actually had scavenger goats, pigs, and dogs that would roam the streets. And this was actually how we handled much of our food waste back at that time. In the 1840s, the New York Daily Tribune estimated 10,000 pigs roaming the streets of New York, which is just kind of only less than 200 years ago, kind of hard to imagine. There's another photo we have here, the 1840s to 1880s, there were peddlers that went by horse and wagon, and they'd go to different households and they'd sell things like pins, needles, iron pans, and cloths. And they'd sell these in exchange for valuable refuse from the houses, like rags or bones and fat. So everything was getting used in this cycle here. I was actually sharing this timeline with my dad, who's a history teacher, and he was letting me know that actually in the 1950s in Detroit, there was an Italian guy in his neighborhood who would go down the street in a horse-drawn carriage in the 1950s, selling tomatoes and peppers. And then another man that had a horse-drawn cart who would go down the alley, and he'd take people's old radios and copper wires and things like that and recycle in that way. So just kind of interesting that in my lifetime, it's kind of hard to imagine anything like that happening, but that's something that he grew up knowing as a young boy. So much can change in little time, actually. And then the 1880s, there were what they called swill children, and they would go around urban neighborhoods and they gather kitchen refuse and they would sell that to farmers for fertilizer or hog food. So everything, again, was getting used in this cycle. But this all changed in 1872 with the invention of mail order catalogs. Montgomery Ward and Sears would offer thousands of different items, but these businesses, they did a one-way business. So this was actually the first change in the system of that recycled waste materials from different households. And so this was the first time in human history, really, when disposal became separated from the production, consumption, and use of different items. So then, of course, shortly afterwards, we're discovering that there's a garbage problem. So in the 1880s to the 1890s, people weren't really sure what to do with the garbage that was building up, and most felt that the government should handle this. So there was kind of some debate on what to do about it. In 1902 era, about a quarter of cities were feeding their garbage to livestock. And then shortly after 1914 to 1918, during World War II, the pork, different prices for certain meats like pork was quite high. And so they had used more garbage feeding as a conservation practice. Like, for example, the city of Philadelphia at that time had actual city-owned pigs that they'd feed their food scraps to. Incineration was another popular option at that time, which declined a little bit later, shortly after. And then unfortunately, many large cities just deposited their waste right into the water. So this is all what was happening until things changed again in a big way in 1937 with the invention of the first modern sanitary landfill. And this didn't require primary separation at all. So any type of waste would go into the landfill. Cities dropped regulations requiring people to separate trash like they had been before. So this was different and this was new. And not only at this time were we disposing of our food differently, we also began producing it differently. So shortly after World War II, we've got a picture of this as well. For an example of how food was viewed during wartime, there was more of a scarcity of different types of food. So afterwards, we started using more chemical fertilizers and pesticides to bump up our crop yields and things like that. So this was decreasing our prices of the foods, but it also increased this accompanying idea of food being cheap and more disposable. So we didn't really need to worry about waste as much as we had during those earlier eras in wartime and things like that. So other kind of notable events in this timeline too, in the 1970s, was actually when environmentalists reintroduced the separation of trash, which is what we now think of as recycling. And then in 1996, we had some food recovery laws put in place. So there was the Good Samaritan Act, sponsored by Bill Emerson, which was created to encourage food donation to nonprofit organizations by minimizing liability. So this is like when you see food donated from a restaurant to a food bank. This is the law that makes that possible now. It's kind of interesting to look back on that time frame, and also even think that the inventions like the landfill, that was less than 100 years ago when that became popularized. So we still, lots of potential for change there. It just sometimes takes a little time. And so we also have here the farm to consumer food chain. So this kind of talks a little bit more about focused on the look of history of food waste through the years. And this is kind of tells you more about how food loss happens as it travels from farm to consumer. So at the farm level, not everything gets harvested. Only 85 to 90% of food grown will be harvested. Weather, of course, impacts the ability to harvest. There can be worker error that causes damage to certain items. And then occasionally there'll be a situation where the cost of harvesting exceeds the profits. On the distributor level, food has to travel, so there can be some losses happening there. Food gets inspected, which can cause damages as well, and sometimes packaging errors. Then on the store level, food gets inspected again. Produce will be regularly culled, and then what doesn't sell at the store will most often get wasted unless there's a practice in place for finding a home elsewhere. Then on the restaurant level, there's lots of food loss happening to things like cooking errors, incorrect orders, perhaps overstocking on something, or making a incorrect projection, not following first in, first out, and then holding temperatures for things, and then plate waste and trim waste in the kitchen. And then on the consumer level, it can food waste happens when we purchase more than we need. Maybe if we improperly store something, misunderstanding Best Buy labels, which we'll talk a little bit more about later. Even having something like too crowded of a fridge and not realizing what's all in there, or not knowing how to use certain items. So when there's different ways to handle it though, and we've got kind of like a hierarchy on the next slide here of what is the first thing that we want to do. So there's a lot of, we see that food waste has happened for many years, and there's lots of different places in our farm to consumer chain where it occurs. In the ideal situation, we want to, first of all, reduce the amount of surplus food generated, so source reduction. Next up on this hierarchy, we have edible food rescue. So getting it into first the hungry bellies of people or animals if we can't find a place for it to go. Then next up is home composting in your backyard, because that's the closest thing to you. And then if that's not an option, getting it to a small scale, medium scale composting facility, or larger, more mechanical facilities. And then as a very last resort, getting to the landfill or incinerator. So that is a little bit more about what to do. So now how to do the composting. We'll cover some core composting concepts here. There's so many different methods that you can use, and it really depends on, what suits your life best. So you can use most commonly is to have a single bin, in the backyard or something like that, or a 3-bin system, even if you have space for it. We'll go over some examples of that in a minute. We'll talk a little bit about vermicomposting, which is composting with worms. There's of course animals. You can feed livestock with your food scraps. Bokashi bin is a Japanese system that ferments your food waste and is perfectly suited to small spaces. So that can be something that you either build or purchase. You can also use a compost tumbler, which is a contained thing. So if you're worried about pests, that can be a really nice option. You can just purchase those. And then aerated static pile is a mechanical system where there's perforated pipes that actually, they go deep under the ground. And they, with the compost on top of it, and then they're connected to a blower that will push or pull air through the compost, and it helps it break down even more rapidly. And then of course, there's also compost pickup services. So in different places, including in Kalamazoo, there's different compost pickup services. Ours is, you can find out more by visiting their new wonderful website, compostkalamazoo.com. So Chris Broadbent does that, and so you can contact him online if that's something you're interested about, or there's also he'll be at the farmers market this summertime. So great to know that we have a compost pickup service here in town. And then, so for examples of what these composting, different types of composting looks like, we've got on the next slide are examples of a one bin compost system. There's one built with cinder blocks. You can also put some mesh on the side, and that provides some aeration. And then on our next slide, we've got some more examples of a 1, 2, or 3 bin system. And we'll talk a little bit more about what situation you might like to use these for, but it's nice for being able to, the top photo is, has like little slats that you can take out and then stir the compost and use the fresh compost from the bottom and take it out and use it on your garden. The one on the other two have one bin where you'll put the fresh compost into, and then once it has a chance to mix, you move it to the second bin, and then it cures on that one, and you just leave it there after it's gotten a chance to mix and things like that. Then on our next slide here, we have vermicomposting, which is a really awesome way of composting that was actually pioneered by a woman from Kalamazoo, Mary Applehoff. She has a great book called The Worms Eat My Garden, or Eat My Garbage. And she was really an incredible pioneer of this that is becoming more and more of a popular and common practice. And the thing that's really nice about it is that it's a fast method for composting. About a pound of worms can eat half a pound of food scraps daily. And it also generates vermicompost in the meanwhile. So that's known as black gold to gardeners. It's so good for the soil, just full of life, and very, very nutritious for your plants. And then worms are also really beneficial for soil aeration, which is really great. Another perk of doing vermicomposting. I'll say that this is so these are pictures of my vermicompost bins. I have the one on the left that I purchased online, and then the other one I made by poking holes all over it. And it's sitting on top of another bin to collect any drainage from the bottom. And I'll say that I do actually prefer the larger bin, but either one works. The other one's nice and compact. But yeah, I'm so excited. I've had those going for 2 years now. And this summer, I'm going to be letting half of one of these bins loose into my garden. And I just can't wait for them to help boost the soil health and everything like that. Other cool thing for the worms is that if you do keep like poultry or things like that, they can also be fed to your chickens and things like that. So it's really like a chance to like be involved in the full circle process of feeding your animals. I mean, in addition to feeding them your food scraps. But yeah, and I'll say too that even if, in the beginning, I was a little squeamish about putting the worms in my hands like that, but it's not like you have to touch them all the time. It's not that kind of pet, but yeah, it's a cool process. So talking a little bit about what can be composted though, it does depend a little bit on how you're doing your composting, what method you're using. But in general, you can compost fruits and vegetables, eggshells, coffee grounds and filters, tea bags, nutshells, shredded newspaper, cardboard, plain printed paper, yard trimmings, grass clippings, your house plants, hay and straw, leaves, sawdust, wood chips, cotton and wool rags, even dryer vacuum cleaner lint. You just want to be aware of any microplastics that might be in there. If you think of a lot of those, maybe just keep it out. Hair and fur, and then fireplace ashes. There are a few things that you want to be cautious about composting, or perhaps don't compost at all on the next slide. So that includes black walnut trees, tree leaves or twigs. That's because it releases substances that might be harmful to plants. Of course, any disease or insect-ridden plants, because that might survive and be transferred onto other plants. Receipts or glossy color or print paper, because the receipts will contain BPA, and then the glossy papers might have heavy inks or chemicals that you wouldn't want in your compost. Then, of course, contaminants like plastic, metal, glass, and then food scraps that might be contaminated with different things like soap. The things that you want to compost with caution include weeds, because you have to get your compost pile to a certain temperature in order to kill weed seeds. So those would then be going into your garden. Dairy products, actually all these food items, dairy products, fats, meat or fish bones and scraps, grains, cooked foods that are a combination of things. Those all can be composted in the right circumstances, but those are just things that if you're worried about pests coming to your compost, then you might not want to put those in there. Or if you're doing a worm bin or something like that, can create odors. So just composting that in the right amount for your situation. Pet waste, they might contain parasites or harmful pathogens. So you just want to keep that in the flower beds, not in the garden beds. And then coal or charcoal ash, those can also contain substances that are harmful to plants. And then yard trimmings or cut flowers that might be have any pesticides in it. Put it somewhere else, but not in your pile. So talking a little bit about the 4 needs of a healthy compost pile, we're going to dive into each one of these in a little bit. So number 1 need is food. That's carbon and nitrogen. We'll talk more about that. Air. So this is why we turn a compost pile and make sure that there's a variety of different materials in there so that air can flow a little bit. Water. The right amount of moisture is really important. And then warmth. So then the conditions to monitor, you use most of your 5 senses, but not all of them. You can monitor the odor of it, the structure of it, moisture, and temperature. And we'll kind of talk about more what you're looking for as we go on. So introduction to carbon and nitrogen, there's a lot to know about this, but it really can be as simple, composting. This is like a little bit more in depth, but it can be as simple as mixing your food scraps, mixing some paper and some leaves with it, and just letting it sit out there. But in general, like if diving a little bit more into the balance of the carbon and nitrogen, this is addressing that number 1 need of a healthy compost pile, which is food. So when we think of carbon in the compost pile, that is, it's the essential energy unit in all living things, and it is the dry or the brown foods in the compost pile. So that would be like your leaves and your paper. And how that works is that microbes will metabolize that carbon in its various forms, and then this carbon provides the energy that drives the process of breaking it down into compost. And for nitrogen is the critical building block of proteins. And this is what's known as like the wet or green part of the compost pile. So this would be your food scraps. And microbes in the compost use the nitrogen to build cells and replicate. And one in this really lovely book about composting called Community Scale Composting Systems by James McSweeney, also available at the Kalamazoo Public Library. He uses the wind farm as an example of the way that carbon and nitrogen work together. So you can think of the carbon as the wind or the energy, and then the nitrogen is like the wind turbines, which is harnessing that energy. So you really need the right amount of nitrogen or turbines in order for you to turn that carbon, the dry and brown materials, into the compost. So yeah, that's a little bit more about how that works. And then for getting that right ratio, because you might hear this talked about in composting, a carbon to nitrogen ratio. So here we have a list of different greens, those nitrogen-rich materials. These all have carbon to nitrogen ratios below 25:1. So that includes food scraps, cow manure, grass, coffee grounds, and chaff. And you want this to be about 20 to 33% of your recipe by volume. So I think a lot of times when people are having issues with like a stinky compost or something like that, it's maybe because it's only food scraps and they need a little bit more of these other things in there, especially like the paper and leaves and things like that, which is kind of nice because another way to recycle paper, really. So yeah, about up to 1/3 of the recipe. These are things that have a high moisture content and they have a high amount of bulk density, which we'll talk about in a second too. And they're also high in protein. And our browns are the carbon-rich materials with carbon to nitrogen ratios above 40:1. So combined together, we're getting the desired ratio that we want, which is in between that 25 to 40:1. So this includes, your browns include sawdust, straw, paper, and horse manures. You want this to be up to 50%, 20 to 50% of your recipe by volume. These are things that have a low amount of moisture and a low amount of bulk density, and they're high in lignin and cellulose. Then your neutrals are things that are already at that really nice carbon to nitrogen ratio. So that's why, you may have heard of like leaves used as leaf mulch, and that's part of what makes it able to be used like that. It's already got the perfect ratio. Other things are hay or grass, horse manure and calf manure. You want this to be 20 to 50% of your recipe, medium moisture level, medium amount of bulk density, and high cellulose. And then porous materials. This is something that is, it can be kind of overlooked in the compost pile sometimes, but we want to have some different, just basically, I feel like it provides texture and helps with aeration, having wood chips, ground bark, and then ground yard debris. It's going to increase the airflow. You want that to be 5 to 20% of your recipe by volume. Yeah, and so a little bit more about these compost targets and moisture content. So this is addressing our number 2 need of air and our number 3 need of water for a healthy compost pile. Here we have more information about like the acceptable and ideal range of the carbon to nitrogen ratio. We want the moisture content to be ideally 55 to 60% moisture. And here in the pictures below, you see what that would look like in your compost pile. So if you have it below 50% and you took some of your compost out and put it in your hand and gave it a squeeze, then it wouldn't be able to form a ball if it was below 50%. But in the middle picture there, you see it forms a nice firm ball with no water dripping out of it. That's at the target of that 50 to 60% moisture content. And then if it's has more moisture than that, then you see in the picture on the right, there's some water dripping out. So that's just too wet. And in that case, maybe you want to put something over your compost in case it rains or something like that. That can help control that. And for like more of a description of the bulk density, which is not really something that you're going to be running into that much when you're home composting anyway, but it's just like basically a measure of the weight per cubic yard to kind of determine how dense your compost is. So you want it to be ideally 700 to 1,000 pounds of weight per cubic yard of compost. And it just kind of tells you that you've got that right mix of those like heavier materials, lighter materials, right amount of moisture balance and things like that. So for temperature ranges, so this is the number 4 need of a healthy compost pile. And there's different microbes that are active at different phases of different temperature ranges here. The ideal temperature for rapid decomposition is 122 to 140 degrees. So this will, happen in the summertime more often. When you form a new pile, it can meet and exceed this temperature within several days or weeks even. Of course, in the winter time, we just kind of wait until we get some warmer temps, but for large piles, like more industrial scale composting, they can still reach these temperatures in the winter by means of like turning their pile regularly and things like that. So the temperature for killing weed seeds and destroying pathogens that you want to reach is 131 degrees, and it should reach that temperature for at least 3 days. So, if you don't want to monitor the temperature of your pile as much, then don't put things like your weed seed in there, and it doesn't become as applicable. But if you're really wanting to like put more things in there, then that can be helpful to actually take the temperature of your pile. You don't want it to get too high because then that can sterilize the pile, and then that would kill some of the beneficial microbes. And then so at the temperatures below, we've got the thermophiles, microbes active at 113 degrees, the mesophiles 77 to 104, and then the psychrophiles are the microbes that are active at 32 to 77 degrees. And there's also a lot of activity being done by earthworms, centipedes, other things like that at that stage. And of course, the hot zone for the compost pile is usually about at least 1 foot into the pile. And then, so that's part of the reason why turning the pile is so important, because you want all different parts of your pile to get at those higher temps so that they have a chance to break down and get all that different microbial activity happening. So for pest management in the compost pile, so there's a lot of different tips that can help with that. So first of all, covering your pile with 2 inches of leaves, grass, or finished compost, going to make all those different veggie peels and everything, a little less alluring when the animals can't see it. Turning it frequently can help too, so everything's getting mixed up. And then making sure you have an adequate amount of brown and dry materials. Like I was saying before, keep things out. If you know that pests are going to be an issue, then maybe you don't want to be composting your dairy and things like that. Also keep your pile away from natural food sources, which are going to be attracting your animals even more so. You can use a hinged lid or a closed system like a compost tumbler if you know that that's going to be an issue where you live. As you saw in the pictures before too, you can also line a bin with wire or mesh to keep animals away. And as for the bugs, there will be bugs. That's the sign of a healthy compost pile. I mean, of course, there's certain bugs that can indicate that maybe something's a little bit out of control in your pile. But yeah, so in general, we do want to see the bugs. I think for when you're using vermicompost, that can be something that's a challenge though. Trying to keep it, away, in the basement if you can be helpful. But you can also do things like freeze your food scraps before adding it to your vermicompost bin if that's something that'll actually kill any bugs or insect seeds. And so that will help keep a bin even cleaner. Then location also plays a part in the composting process. So sun is going to help the decomposition process. Shade keeps the pile moist. So you might want to be thinking about either one, but the shade is a little more easier to create. If you put it over soil or grass, then you're going to be able to utilize the earthworms and microbes that's coming from underneath the compost pile. You might want to locate your bin in a place that's away from your house or neighbors, in case it takes a little practice to get that right balance of everything. And in case there might be a few smells at first. You want to keep it within reach of the hose, or at least be able to add water if you need to with a bucket. It can be helpful to locate it next to your garden so that you don't have to go back and forth if that's one of the reasons that you're starting compost. And then having good drainage is important too. You wouldn't want to put it on like concrete or something like that. So to kind of wrap up the core concepts section, I wanted to talk about returning the nutrients to soil, which is one of the most important impacts that composting makes. So there's so much going on in our soil and so much that can either make it life-giving or barren. So I recently heard soil described as the marriage of geology and biology. I thought that was a really cool description. So there's talking about the geological side, which is the mineral matter, which is the reservoir of all the original nutrients in the soil. And then there's the biological side. So this is all the things that were once alive that are now living on in our soil, as well as the actual living organisms that are taking these minerals out of the soil and putting them into the biological circulation. So yeah, there's a balance to all of this, and we can't just continue to take from the soil as we've been doing it. We saw, been doing this for 100 years now. We need to be giving back something to the soil. So on that note, change is happening in this area, and since it's always nice to know what we can do in our small actions to make a difference, we're going to close on a few ideas around that. So I include this buckle up for safety here because cultural shifts really take time, but they do happen. Back in the 70s, it was actually really uncommon to wear a seatbelt. But after a lot of time, messaging around it, laws being enacted around it, nowadays it's it's more uncommon for somebody to not be wearing their seatbelt. So I like to think that this can happen for composting too. And here we have a map where we see that this is happening in different places. So there's the green states here are places where there are some form of an organic food waste ban in place. One of the more recent ones is in Vermont, where it is banned for any food scraps to be in the landfill. And then the different little purple dots are different cities where they have some form of a municipal food waste ban, and many of those places then provide green bins for people to put their food scraps in. I know that in Michigan, the city of Ann Arbor has a large composting site where they have the option for their residents to, they have green bins that they can use there. And I believe that Grand Rapids, I toured it about year and a half ago, and they were expanding to Grand Rapids as well. So just kind of neat that that's going on in our area too, so close. And then next up, we have this just as a nice reference, food recovery hierarchy from the Environmental Protection Agency. So this is similar to the hierarchy that we saw earlier, but maybe an easier reference. So here we see at the top, we want to reduce the amount of surplus food generated. Next up, we want to feed hungry people, then feed animals, industrial uses like biofuels, and then use composting if we can't find another use for it. And then at the very bottom, send things to the landfill. So just kind of a helpful thing to be keeping in mind, and great that's, that we have a stance on that. So talking about what we can do on the individual level, knowing your food product dating is a big one, and talking to other people in your life about it so that they know more about this too. So for the Best By date, there's a lot of confusion around things like this. Best By just means best flavor or quality. It doesn't mean that that food is no longer safe to consume. The sell by date, this just tells a store how long to display. It doesn't mean that when you take that bread home, and if it's a day past the sell by date, it's no longer good. That's just when it should be sold. Use by, that also means for use at peak quality unless it's used for infant formula. And then freeze by is when to freeze for peak quality as well. And these are all from the USDA, which is, telling, a thing that people turn to for, what can be safe in food. So this is just good thing to know about the product dating. And the picture on the right here actually is a fridge magnet from Food Gatherers, also in Ann Arbor. I interned there many years ago, and they actually were started in part by Zingerman's, and as a response to the food waste that they were seeing and wanting to get more food out into their community. And so I thought this was an awesome magnet because it tells you about specific things and how long they can last past their date. So eggs, cheese, and yogurt, actually 2 weeks past their Best By date. And the same thing with milk and cream can be 7 days, bread, pastry products, 5 days, and then cut fruit and industry packaged deli items, 5 days as well, locally packaged deli 3. So just good things to know and keep in mind. Another opportunity for us to use our senses to test those things and determine if they can still be eaten. And last, some different ways that you can be brave and take small actions to normalize composting. So talk to your friends and neighbors about composting. Start a compost at your work or at your child's school. My little girl is only 2 years old, but I cannot wait until she gets into first grade and I can be the mom that comes in and talks about her worm bin and teaches the kids about it. But installing your own compost or speaking with a landlord or property management if you don't own your own home. We did this at a previous place where we lived, and we kind of pitched it to our landlord as a draw. We're like, more people are going to be composting here, and they did start composting there. Then asking to take home compostable waste at dinner parties. A really cool couple I met living out in Oregon did this. We had opened up a watermelon at a friend's house, and they were like so excited. They're like, can we take that home? It wasn't ready to eat, and so we couldn't eat it. And they're like, can we take that home and feed it to our chickens? And they were so excited. And I was like, that's so cool. So just like little things. I'm sure it felt a little bit funny to be asking that at first for them, but it makes it more normal. And then organizing a donation route from a grocery store to food pantry. I think this is a real opportunity for people who are working in food service to make the connection happen there if you're seeing a lot of food getting put to waste. Thanking local grocers for offering reduced price produce. There are some great grocery stores in Kalamazoo that are wonderful at doing this. The Park Street Market, Midtown Fresh, and Sewalls, I've seen discounted produce there. I think a lot of places believe that their customers don't want to eat foods like that, and so they remove them from the shelves. But this, when you either you can ask for, if you find damaged produce, ask for it at a discount, or think or speak to the managers about it. This lets them know that we do want to be using these items still. Then support and talk about businesses who compost. So Bell's, there's a lot of great different businesses in Kalamazoo like Bell's, Hopcat. Last I checked, Tibbs and Kalamazoo State Theater also did composting along that corridor. There were a few different businesses that did. So that's really great to see that happening. And then lastly, ask your representatives and officials to support legislation and policies that make it easier to compost. So yeah, that's what I've got about that, and got some references there at the very end. And yes, that's fine to share the slides with everybody.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, Amelia, thank you so much. That was really thought-provoking and thorough. I loved it. And we have quite a few questions that have come into chat
Sure.
and also in the Q&A. So if you don't mind, I'd love to pepper you with some questions.
Yeah, of course.
All right. So let's see. You did answer that you would make the slides available. So thank you so much. We had lots of compliments about enjoying the history that you provided. So kudos to you and thank you. Wondering if you could go over again what types of paper are okay and what types of paper are not okay for composting.
Sure. Yeah. So, in general, like composting, just plain white paper with just black print is like the safest way to go. For the glossy papers and papers that might have heavy color dye, I think if it has a little bit of color dye, that's okay. But if you're, it's heavily dyed, then you would want to probably keep that out of your compost.
Great. Thank you so much. Another question is, how should we take the temp of our compost? So how do you temp it?
They actually sell compost thermometers that you can buy. So it's just a very long one. I saw it at the Ann Arbor city compost tour. I don't think that they're too expensive, so you could buy one for a home compost too. And then other than that, I suppose you could also like dig into there and just use a different smaller thermometer too for a makeshift solution. Or also just feel it with your hand and kind of register. But yeah, if you're wanting to like officially make sure that you're, if you're composting weeds and want to make sure that you're hitting that temp, you might want to think about investing in one of those.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
And there's a few more questions in the Q&A section. I think, and there's more coming as well.
Yeah.
But we have a question about dealing with huge amounts of pine needles and cones. Which type of compost would that be considered?
Pine needles and cones. I believe that would be more the porous type of material. So that's what you'd want to like kind of categorize it in your mix under.
Thank you. And we have another question about if you know of any community organizations in Kalamazoo County at the township level working on spreading the composting message to residents and businesses.
I do know that, Chris Broadbent with Compost Kalamazoo is doing work on that. And so I guess that would be your best bet for touching base. But there's also the WMU Office for Sustainability. They do some composting as well. So that's another great place to try to connect to about that.
And Dr. Weber posed that question and she said hi, just FYI.
Yeah, hi, Dr. Weber.
All right. And we have another question that's asking about newsprint. Do you think that's compostable?
Yeah, I would consider that to be compostable.
All right.
And then one last question so far is, can you please talk more about the Japanese compost bin that you mentioned early in the presentation?
Yeah, I can tell you a little bit more about it, but I actually, I have never composted with that method before, but I know you can purchase them online. You can also make your own, but basically it's an anaerobic process. So you can compost meat and things like that in the bokashi bin, but you will add like enzymes to it to get it kick-started. If anybody has other thoughts on that, feel free, but
yeah, it's really efficient. And I think time, it's a shorter period of time and in space efficient as well.
Yeah, and I have heard that you can actually put it like right into put it right on the ground. So it's like depositing it right to where the, the end use or whatever. So that's another kind of neat thing that people do with those bins.
Yeah.
Another question about composting we have about what do you think about the little kitchen compost bins? I'm assuming They're referring to the compost bins that you can put like on your kitchen counter. Come in little pretty shapes and sizes.
Yeah, I guess I'm not as familiar about being able to use those as for the complete composting process. I'm not sure if that is what they're saying that they can do.
It says like, are those useful to start composting?
Oh, yeah, I think it can. I guess I kind of imagine it being like more of a kitchen caddy, but yeah, it can help get started. I think you're going to need a larger bin eventually to put that into. There'd just be a pile in the backyard or whatever, but.
Yeah, I don't know if that's exactly what Christine was asking, but I'll say for me, I have a little like compost bin that I keep in my kitchen because like I don't want to walk out to my bigger bin every time I'm like cooking. So I definitely have a little bin on my kitchen counter that also just helps me stay like honest about it. So like I can't be, like lazy and just throw something in a trash. It's just like right there. It's even closer to my cutting board than my trash can. So it also helps me with like my behavior modification. But I think those can be helpful, at least from my own experience, just right on your counter.
Yeah, and I wasn't quite, I totally have that as well for my moving the compost to the thing. So yeah, I definitely think it's a really handy tool for getting it to its bigger bin.
Yeah. So we have another question that came in the Q&A and it says, do you need to mix compost in with other soil or can you use it straight in your garden? And what kind of percentage compost to what else in your garden?
Yeah, that's a good question. So you would want to put it, it kind of depends. Like for my vermicompost, I will put like a little top dressing around a plant. And so then the water from, it'll kind of filter down so it's not so potent on the plants. And when the plants are young, I don't sometimes I do put a little vermicompost in with the roots actually, and that does fine. But yeah, you can sometimes plant. I think the best practice is to mix it with your soil though, because otherwise it can burn the plants. So I think safest bet is you want to mix, I would say probably like a 2/3 soil to 1/3 compost would probably be a safe mix to do.
Love it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you everybody for attending today, this evening, and thank you, Amelia, for a wonderful presentation.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to have the opportunity.
And we have
share the presentation with everyone. We'll send an email to everybody with the slides, and hopefully you can connect with the local composting resources that we have. And we're always available if you want to reach out for any more questions. We're here.
Absolutely. Thank you. Have a great night. Thank you, Amelia.
Yes, of course. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.